Put your hands where I can see them and step outside slowly.
Officer, what is this about? We live here.
We haven't done anything wrong.
It was just after midnight when the silence of the street was shattered. No warning. New sirens. Just the sudden growl of engines cutting through the dark. Unmarked SUVs rolled in fast and hard. Tires crunching against the curb. Doors flew open. Heavy boots hit pavement. Radios crackled with clipped voices, moving in sync. Floodlights snapped on all at once, turning the front of a quiet suburban home into a stage. White light poured over the porch. The windows. The driveway, erasing shadows. Erasing comfort. Rifles came up. Officers spread out with precision. Taking positions like this wasn't a misunderstanding, but a confirmed target. This wasn't a patrol stop. This wasn't a knock and talk. This was a planned entry. Inside the house, a family jolted awake. Moments earlier, the night had been ordinary locked doors. Lights off. Sleep settling in. Now their home was surrounded by armed officers shouting commands through the darkness. Police come out now. The voice outside didn't ask. It ordered. The officers believed they were at the right address. They believed the situation was already under control. And they believed whoever lived inside would comply first and ask questions later. What they didn't know was that the man inside that house wasn't a frightened homeowner trying to understand what was happening. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't reaching for anything. He was trained for moments exactly like this, because when armed officers surround a house in the middle of the night, the most dangerous thing isn't fear. It's what happens when authority moves faster than verification. And as the commands continued and rifles stayed trained on the front door, the operation outside was already drifting toward a mistake they couldn't undo. They just didn't realize it yet. The front door didn't fly open. There was no sudden movement. No panicked reaction. Instead, it opened slowly, just enough. A man stepped into the doorway and stopped. Both hands raised. Palms open. Body still. He didn't cross the threshold. He didn't step onto the porch. He stayed exactly where the line between inside and outside still belonged to him. His name was Jordan Reed. And while the officers outside saw a silhouette under blinding lights, they didn't yet understand who they were dealing with. Jordan wasn't guessing his next move. He wasn't improvising. He was executing training. Years as a deputy U.S. Marshal had taught him how quickly situations like this spiral, not because of criminals, but because of confusion, adrenaline, and authority colliding in the dark. He spoke calmly, clearly. "I'm law enforcement," he said. "Before anything else happens, I need to see the warrant." That sentence landed like friction. The officers hadn't expected it. They weren't prepared for it. This wasn't the response their playbook was built for. They wanted him outside. They wanted him under their lights. They wanted control. But Jordan understood something most people don't in these moments. Once you step outside your home, you don't just step into the night. You step into someone else's version of events. So he didn't argue. He didn't explain his feelings. He didn't raise his voice. He held his hands where they could be seen. He kept his body still. And he repeated the same demand. "Show me the warrant." That was the moment the raid stopped being routine. The officers didn't produce a warrant. Instead, the commands came faster. "Step outside now. Hands up and walk toward us." The tone shifted from announcement to pressure. They spoke like the decision had already been made, like Jordan's only option was compliance. But Jordan didn't move. He knew that voice. He'd heard it on other doorsteps. Other nights. Other operations that went wrong because someone chose speed over certainty. Once you step outside, the rules change. Inside the doorway, You still have structure. Outside, everything becomes interpretation. Jordan stayed where he was. No one is stepping out, he said calmly, until the warrant is shown and the address is verified. That answer irritated the lead officer immediately. They treated his request like an obstacle, not a requirement, like a challenge to authority instead of a legal boundary. The commands repeated, sharper this time, louder. They framed the situation as simple: do what we say. And this gets easier. But Jordan understood the trap. Easy for who? Because he'd seen how quickly step outside turns into hands on your head, and how just cooperate turns into a report written after the fact. So he didn't argue about intentions. He didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing. He stuck to procedure. Hands visible, voice steady, position unchanged. Every second they refused to show the warrant. The operation outside drifted further away from legality and closer to liability. And Jordan knew it. The officers outside still believed they were in control. But control without verification was about to cost them. When the commands didn't work, the strategy changed. The lead officer reframed Jordan's calm refusal as a problem, not a legal question, a safety issue. He suggested that asking for a warrant was making the situation dangerous. That officers couldn't guarantee anyone's safety unless Jordan did what they said first. It was a familiar script. Comply now. Paperwork later. They spoke like procedure was optional, something to be sorted out once control had been established. Like legality could wait. Jordan recognized the tactic immediately. This wasn't about safety. It was about momentum. If they could pull him out of the doorway, they could dictate every movement, every word, every outcome. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't challenge their authority. He corrected the frame. I'm not refusing law enforcement, he said evenly. I'm asking for the warrant you're claiming to have. That distinction mattered. But the officers didn't acknowledge it. Instead, they implied that Jordan was being difficult, that insisting on documentation was a form of non-compliance, that the safest thing he could do was surrender the one advantage he still had staying inside his own home. Jordan didn't fall for it. He kept his hands up, exactly where they could be seen. He stayed still, eliminating any excuse to claim sudden movement or confusion, because he knew something most people don't realize until it's too late. The moment you give up position, you give up the ability to slow things down. And outside, with rifles trained on the door, the officers were beginning to realize this wasn't going to be a quick surrender. It was becoming a standoff they couldn't easily justify. That's when Alyssa Reed stepped into the doorway beside him. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. Her presence was calm, but deliberate. Alyssa had lived around risk long enough to recognize what this moment really was. Not a misunderstanding. A pressure test. She addressed the officers clearly. This property is covered by multiple exterior cameras, she said. They're recording everything. She didn't threaten them. She documented them. That one sentence changed the air outside. Because now, this wasn't just a standoff. It was a timeline being created in real time. Every command, every refusal to show the warrant, every attempt to reframe Jordan's request as defiance, all of it was being captured. The officers didn't lower their rifles. They didn't soften their tone. But their posture shifted. When authority realizes it's being recorded, instinct gives way to calculation. The lead officer pressed harder. He treated the cameras like a complication instead of a safeguard. He implied that recording was escalating the situation. That cooperation would make everything simpler. Jordan didn't respond emotionally. He repeated the same thing he'd said from the start. No one is coming outside until the warrant is displayed and the address is confirmed. Alyssa stayed beside him. She didn't speak over him. She reinforced him. She made it clear they weren't relying on memory. They weren't relying on reports written later. They were preserving facts. Outside, the perimeter tightened. Officers shifted positions, adjusting angles, compressing the space, like they were trying to force the moment to resolve through pressure instead of verification. Inside the doorway, nothing changed. Two people, hands visible, voices calm, and a situation that was becoming harder to control with intimidation alone. When pressure alone didn't work, the officers shifted again. "Prove who you are," the lead officer demanded. It sounded reasonable on the surface, but Jordan knew exactly what that demand was designed to do. He could show credentials, but only if he moved. Only if he reached. Only if he broke stillness. And in moments like this, movement becomes the story. Jordan answered carefully. "I can present credentials." He said, "But I'm not reaching for anything, and I'm not stepping outside until the warrant is shown." That response closed another trap, because officers often demand proof while creating conditions where producing that proof can be labeled suspicious. Jordan refused to let that happen. The tone outside sharpened. They spoke slower now, heavier, like they were building a record in their own heads. The lead officer warned him he was delaying an operation, that his behavior could be interpreted as obstruction. Jordan didn't argue the language. He redirected the focus. "Show me the warrant," he repeated. "Show me the address. Then we'll talk." Then he asked for a supervisor, and the watch commander, and the warrant number, and the issuing court. Each request was calm. Each one was reasonable, and together, they forced the officers to confront something they'd been avoiding. If they truly had the right house, this would already be over. Outside, one officer shifted uncomfortably. His rifle stayed up, but his eyes didn't stay locked on the door. He glanced sideways, listening to the radio traffic behind him. Doubt had entered the perimeter. And once doubt appears in an armed operation, pressure stops working the way it's supposed to. Jordan didn't need to raise his voice. He only needed to keep the situation exactly where it was. The standoff dragged on longer than anyone outside expected. Minutes felt heavier under rifle lights. Commands lost their sharpness. Momentum stalled. That's when the lead officer made the mistake that changed everything. Frustrated, he let his guard down just enough. He said the warrant could be dealt with after Jordan was outside and secured. He meant it as reassurance. It landed as a confession. Because in one sentence, he revealed the real priority. Control first. Paperwork later. Jordan didn't react emotionally. He didn't seize the moment with anger. He narrowed the focus. "I'm not stepping into a situation where I can be detained at gunpoint," he said calmly, without legal authority being presented first. He emphasized who he was not as a threat, but as context. "I'm a deputy E.S.F. Marshal," he said. "A wrong house entry with rifles raised destroys careers and budgets." The lead officer didn't like that reminder. He tried to reframe Jordan's restraint as defiance. He repeated the demand to exit. He implied Jordan was escalating the situation. But the damage was done. The mask had slipped. Everyone on that scene now knew the truth. This wasn't about safety. It was about regaining control of a moment that was drifting away. Jordan tightened his position. He made one thing unmistakably clear. He would remain exactly where he was until the warrant was physically displayed on camera with the address clearly visible and a supervisor confirmed they were at the correct location. No exceptions. No verbal assurance. That statement changed the rules of the night, because now, the next move belonged entirely to the officers, and whatever they chose to do next would be captured forever. After Jordan drew that line, The noise outside changed. The commands stopped stacking. The shouting slowed. Now the radios mattered more than the rifles. Officers began talking to each other instead of at the door. Short bursts of radio traffic cut through the night. Clipped and careful. Someone asked for confirmation. Someone else asked for the paperwork. The perimeter didn't disappear, but it loosened. Rifles stayed up, but no one advanced. That's when one officer broke formation and moved back toward the vehicles. Not to reposition, to retrieve the warrant. You could feel the shift. This was no longer a raid in motion. It was a verification scramble. Jordan didn't step forward. He didn't lean out. He didn't change posture. Hands visible, body still. Alyssa stayed beside him and reinforced the condition again. The warrant needs to be shown clearly, she said, and the address needs to be visible on camera. She wasn't accusing. She was setting terms. Outside, the lead officer hesitated. This wasn't how the operation was supposed to go. They were supposed to be done by now. But the moment Jordan refused to surrender the doorway, power stopped flowing in one direction. Now it had to pass through paper. And paper doesn't respond to intimidation. As the officer returned toward the front of the house, holding a folded document, the energy drained out of the scene. Because everyone understood what was about to happen. Either the warrant would justify everything they'd done so far, or it would unravel it all. The officer stepped forward and raised the paper into the light. Not confidently, carefully. Jordan didn't move closer. He didn't reach. He stayed exactly where he was. Eyes locked on the document. "Hold it still," Alyssa said, "so the camera can see it." The officer unfolded the warrant. And in that moment, everything collapsed. The address printed on the page did not match the house they were standing in front of. It wasn't close. It wasn't ambiguous. It was wrong. The effect was immediate. The voices outside softened. Commands slowed. The aggressive certainty drained from the scene like air escaping a punctured tire. Rifles began to lower, not all at once, but enough to be noticed. Jordan pointed it out calmly. "That's not this address." He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He stated it like a fact that couldn't be argued. Because it couldn't. In an instant, the entire operation lost its foundation. They had surrounded the wrong house, with rifles raised in the middle of the night, and they had refused to show the warrant until they were forced to. The lead officer's posture changed. What had been authority turned into damage control. The raid was over not because anyone surrendered, but because the paper could no longer protect the power that had been used. And now, every second before this moment mattered more than anything that came after. The lead officer tried to end it right there. He folded the warrant back up and shifted his tone. No more shouting. No more urgency. He spoke like this was a simple mistake. Like everyone could just move on. "We're disengaging," he said. "Wrong address." That was the moment they wanted it to disappear. But Jordan didn't let it end that way. He didn't step outside. He didn't relax his posture. He asked for names, badge numbers, unit identifiers. He requested the incident number. The supervisor on duty. Alyssa began documenting immediately. She noted the time, the order of commands, who had been positioned where. She made sure the cameras captured faces, uniforms, and vehicle numbers as officers started backing away. The same people who had demanded immediate compliance minutes earlier now wanted a clean exit. Rifles lowered further. Stances opened. The perimeter loosened. Jordan stayed calm. He made it clear this wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability. Because the most dangerous part of the night wasn't the wrong address. It was the decision to treat a home like a target first and verify later. And he wasn't going to let that be written out of the story. Not this time. When the last vehicle rolled away and the lights disappeared, the night wasn't over. Not for the Reeds. They didn't treat what just happened like a scare to shake off. They treated it like the opening of an investigation. Inside the house, they moved with purpose. Jordan secured the footage first. Every camera angle, every timestamp. Nothing was deleted. Nothing was trimmed. They backed everything up more than once because Jordan understood how quickly evidence can disappear once reports start getting written. Alyssa built the timeline while the memory was still sharp, minute by minute. First command. First demand to exit. First refusal to show the warrant. She wrote down badge numbers, vehicle descriptions, radio chatter they could hear from outside. They didn't rely on emotion. They relied on sequence. Jordan made calls through proper channels not to flex authority, but to protect the integrity of what had happened. He knew something most people don't realize until it's too late. If you wait, the story gets told without you. By morning, this wasn't just a terrifying night anymore. It was a documented incident. One with video. One with timelines. One with decisions that could no longer be explained away as confusion. And that's when the real consequences began to take shape. The investigation didn't move fast, but it moved forward. At first, the department leaned on familiar language. Confusion. Officer safety. A fast-moving situation, but the video didn't support the story they wanted to tell. Frame by frame. It showed something very different. A calm homeowner, hands visible, repeated requests for a warrant, and officers who escalated anyway who treated legal verification like an inconvenience instead of a requirement. The warrant itself did the most damage. Wrong address. No ambiguity. No excuse. That single sheet of paper erased every justification they tried to build around the raid. The lead officer took the hardest hit. The review placed responsibility where it belonged, and the city moved to terminate him. Then came the civil case. Jordan and Alyssa didn't need drama. They needed clarity. Wrong house. Rifles raised. Warrant withheld. Pressure tactics to force a homeowner outside at gunpoint. The city saw the same thing a jury would see. And that's why they settled. $5 million. Not because they wanted to be generous, but because the evidence made the risk undeniable. Policy changes followed. Verification rules tightened. Supervisors became directly accountable. And the reason this story matters isn't because the homeowner was a deputy U.S. Marshal. It's because if this could happen to someone trained, disciplined, and recording it can happen to anyone. So ask yourself this. If armed officers showed up at your door tonight, would you know what to ask for? And would you be calm enough to hold your ground? Because rights don't disappear all at once. They disappear the moment pressure convinces you to give them up. And rights only matter if you can hold on to them under pressure.